thought you were so lucky because you were a star, but you cried, cried, cried in the lonely dark. And I'm sorry for what you went through. I always thought the lucky one was you, but the lucky one was me. I wanted to be you so bad. Your life looked like so much fun. The flashing lights and fancy things made it seem like you had won. But little did I know, you were crying all the time. You were hurting inside when everyone thought you were fine. I thought you were so lucky because you were a star, but you cried, cried, cried in the lonely dark. And I'm sorry for what you went through. I always thought the lucky one was you, but the lucky one was me. I know you made some mistakes, but we're all only human. You were judged for everything. They put the blame on you when you were pushed over the edge. It ain't right what they allege. I thought you were so lucky, but the lucky one was me. I thought you were so lucky because you were a star, but you cried, cried, cried in the lonely dark. And I'm sorry for what you went through. I always thought the lucky one was you, but the lucky one was me.
Hey, this is Jonathan Cahn on the road in my car in a storm, but I didn't want to wait, and I'm doing this through my cell phone, the first part. Well, listen, what on earth happened at the Olympics? What does it mean? A lot more than you probably thought. It's colossal, significant, prophetic. It's going to affect all of our lives, and we're going to expose it, open it up. First, to make sure you don't miss any of these prophetic messages and all that comes on this channel, hit subscribe. Second, if there are people in your life who need to know, send this message to them. Third, update on the dragon's prophecy is coming out in about 15 days from our posting this. Now, one of the mysteries in the book actually foretold what would happen in Israel, the invasion, down to the year, the week, the day, the very day. And it may enable us to know exactly what's going to happen and when. So that's coming out. There's so much people pre-ordering this. It's breaking all sorts of records. So how do you get it? Wherever you get books online, you can get it right now, and for people in your life. And soon it's going to be everywhere. All right. The last thing, if you want to get free gifts, prophetic updates, all my teachings, to find out where that is, just go to hopeoftheworld.org. Be part of the End Time Great Commission, hopeoftheworld.org. The link is in the description. All right, I'm doing this because I didn't want to wait. And the thing is that people said, you know what, I had just shared this just before I came out on the road, and they said, people who heard it said, you got to post this, you got to put this online so everybody can see it. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to put this on, I'm going to put this right on, and I'll be back at the end in my car. So, but check it out. There's something very important, and this was recorded live. I just shared it at the Jerusalem Center at Beth Israel in Wayne, New Jersey. So let me take you right in to the Olympian mystery. We're going to open up the real significance, because it was very significant, something gigantic, and what happened at the Olympics, and what it signifies for our time. We're going to go deeper into it. Something that is affecting the world, everyone who is listening. It was the opening ceremony of the Olympics, viewed by nations all over the earth. The whole world comes together for this. There were red flags from the beginning. Images of Marie Antoinette, the French queen whose head was chopped off in the French Revolution. Images of the queen with her head chopped off and holding her severed head. And her severed head was singing. It was singing, all will be well, but the joke was on her. Get it? All will be well, but this is what happened. Then it showed blood coming splattering down from the building. This is for children across the world. You know right there, it's not going to be well. There's a red flag, and it was basically demonic. The opening of the Olympics featured the head of a golden bull. That's a grown-up golden calf, connected to a French statue, but whatever the reason, it's a pagan image. The golden calf was the biblical symbol of a people that had known God, now turning away from God. It was a good symbol of what was coming.
The opening of the Olympics featured a threesome, meaning it involved bisexuality, same-sex sexuality, celebrating it, showing a man kissing a woman. But then in the end, the two men gaze at each other and they close the door as they're going to do something interesting. They didn't show the two men kissing because they knew it would go too far for a global audience. So they knew what they were doing. And you had men dressed as women, drag queens, running around dancing, not as a side thing, but as a central thing, prominently featured for the world and the world's children. They made it the most globally watched drag show in human history, something that could never have been imagined even a few years ago, that everybody would have seen as a sign of depravity just a few years ago. Something you expect to see in scenes of an ancient pagan civilization crumbling before destruction. Might as well have announced that the next Olympics will be hosted by Sodom and Gomorrah. Might have been an improvement. Then they descended even further, if that was possible. Here in France, civilization that has espoused belief in Jesus for nearly 2,000 years, they displayed to the world a mockery of the Last Supper. Now, of course, they denied it. They said they weren't trying to do the Last Supper. Rather, they were doing it based on another painting. Interesting, they admit that. But the painting was called The Feast of the Gods. A 17th century Dutch painting. Well, that kind of was revealing the Olympic ceremony was basically a feast of the gods. They said it was, well, so there's another kind of painting, engraving, an Italian one, the wedding banquet of Cupid and Psyche, also pagan gods. They gave contradictory explanations. Think about it. Their defense against mocking the Christian faith was, well, we weren't trying to mock Christianity. We were just trying to celebrate a pagan feast to pagan gods. The truth is, nobody who saw that image was thinking of an obscure engraving or painting that nobody ever heard of. And now look at that painting that they claim it was about. That's what they're claiming, okay? Now see which is a match. Now look at the Last Supper. Which one is a match? Whatever the intention they clearly evoked to the world, the Last Supper, they either fully intended it or they could not have possibly not realized that that's what it would invoke. In fact, the woman who is sitting in the place of Jesus, a lesbian who calls herself Barbara Butch, posted this online, which basically admitted it was the Last Supper. And then she puts there, yes, it's the new gay testament. Then she deleted it quickly because the Olympic Committee probably said, take it down quickly. But then this came up. Paris Olympics admit opening ceremony drag show was based on Last Supper, then tried to walk it back. Note what is unique about the images. It's very unique about Da Vinci's Last Supper that it is one long table and everybody's sitting on one side. Notice that's exactly what they did. Notice even the dramatic poses, they're turning away, they're turning back, all reminiscent of Last Supper. And I noticed something. Look at the disciple, about 3 or so people to the right of the Lord there, Jesus, with his arms stretched out horizontally. Now look at the Olympic display, about 3 or so people, and a man dressed with his arms stretched out horizontally. Now notice them together. Notice what colors the disciple is wearing who has his arm, gray and blue. Notice what the drag queen is wearing, gray and blue. One is pointing to Jesus, the other is pointing away from the person in the place of Jesus. One is pointing to the right, the other to the left. Note how the Olympics also have the central figure. The central figure is separated. Of course, it's Jesus's place, separated by himself. It was exactly what you thought it was. The most globally viewed, disseminated blasphemy of the Christian faith, I believe, that I have ever known about in 2,000 years. And performed by a, quote, Christian culture, or once Christian. How did the mainstream media respond to it? Did they report it honestly? No. When Muslims are offended by anything that has to do with Muhammad, that comes out. What they actually did is they praised it. The media, mainstream media, praised what happened. They said it was inclusive and vibrant. You see how inclusivity has become a weapon against God and his people. And after praising it, they mentioned, well, some of the religious right and the Christian nationalists, as if Christian nationalism has anything to do with anything, were riled up over it, those crazy, insensitive Christians, for not celebrating diversity, for not celebrating the desecration of their holiest sacrament. Do you see where this is going? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yes, but when it comes to the Christian faith, we don't want diversity. We want diversity as long as it means conformity to the new woke consensus. When it comes to God and believers, we don't want diversity, we want conformity. We don't want equity, we want inequity, to treat them as you would treat no other people. Of course, the ladies on The View weighed in on it. The great thinker and intellectual of our times, Whoopi Goldberg, said, if you're offended by it, turn the channel. Really? This on a show that exists to showcase 5 women ranting about what offended them and never turning the channel. Imagine if the Olympic Committee performed a drag queen mockery of Muhammad's death. Can you imagine what would happen? Well, you can't, because they never would dare do that. Yes. Imagine telling them, just, hey, Muslims, turn the channel if you don't like our mockery of Muhammad. Imagine if racists and bigots performed a mockery of an ethnic group or a racial group, and they were told, well, Joe, you don't like it, turn the channel. Imagine if Christians had a mockery of LGBT. Would never happen. They'd be crucified by the media. If a Christian athlete simply says, I don't think it's appropriate for our team to be forced to celebrate an alternate sexuality, they can get fired. Only with Christians can you do this. Those are the only ones you can offend with impunity. In the name of inclusion, you can exclude. In the name of diversity, you can ban and mock. In the name of equity, you can do to them what you do to no other group, which tells you something. It's not natural, it's demonic. As was that ceremony. The enemy is an inverter. And what we just witnessed was an inversion. Inverting everything. In place of the apostles, putting drag queens. Inverting women for men, but not quite women. The women were actually men coming as women to replace men. It's an inversion of an inversion. Jesus the Redeemer, depicted by an openly lesbian Barbara Butch, is a spirit of desecration. And you see that spirit throughout that culture of altering sexuality. You see a spirit of desecration. That's not an accident, because the altering of sexuality is itself a desecration of God's creation. Years ago in America, the culture of men dressing up as women and performing was illegal through much of America. Unthinkable, illegal through much of the world. Unthinkable that it would ever appear on television and on the Olympics. And the Last Supper communion was revered. Now that culture, which was once illegal on the fringes, is now the culture, is now the mainstream culture. And God, Jesus, the Lord, communion is becoming contraband, is becoming something you can mock. The culture has morphed into its opposite. We are watching, it wasn't a fluke, we are watching something much bigger. A war of civilizations, a spiritual war, and a transformation. First fact, 4 words. The Olympics are, this might surprise you, the Olympics are pagan. I'm not condemning the people who partake in it. I'm not condemning, certainly not the athletes. They're just competing. I'm not saying they're doing anything wrong. I'm not speaking of individuals or their motives. But the Olympics themselves are actually pagan. They're connected to something ancient and a sign concerning the future. The word Olympics, from Mount Olympus, Olympia, the dwelling place of the Greek pagan gods. The Olympics come from ancient paganism. They had athletics, but you know what? They were a religious celebration. A religious celebration. In the midst of the athletic events were rituals, prayers to pagan gods, sacrifices, feasts. The athletes would compete in the nude. Actually, you know what? Hanukkah came in existence to basically stop all this when it happened in Israel. Interesting. The athletes would compete in the nude. Married women were not allowed to attend, only unmarried women. Multitudes of prostitutes. The Olympics were a pagan religious festival in honor of the Greek god Zeus. A priestess of Hera would perform the start of the opening ceremony. She would pray to the god Apollo to light the Olympic torch. The opening ceremony was pagan. The priestess would carry the flame in a vase to the stadium, to the altar. From the altar, that's where that flame comes from an altar of a pagan god. The priestess would then perform a ritual dance in praise of the lighting of the flame. She would give thanks to Apollo, give a prayer to Zeus, saying, "You, Zeus, grant peace to all people on earth, and crown the victors in the sacred struggle." Then came a relay of the torch, the release of a white dove over the stadium. In the opening ceremony, the priests of Zeus would offer up a sacrifice to the god Zeus, a pig. The athletes would take part in the ceremony. The athletes would swear allegiance to Zeus and the gods. And throughout the Olympics was the worship of the gods. The Olympic winners would go to the temple of Zeus and sacrifice to the gods. Now, of course, our modern Olympics are not pagan at all. Do you know that at every Olympic there's a prayer lifted up? The Olympic prayer? To whom? It says, "O ancient spirit, immortal, pure Father," Zeus was called Father, "descend, appear, and sparkle over here, and your pilgrim is running to this temple." What temple? Not the temple of Jerusalem. What temple? As the priestess of Hera and the Vestal virgins began the ceremony with fire from the altar at the temple of Hera, the modern Olympics begin at the temple of Hera with a company of women representing the Vestal virgins. That's how it begins. Who light the altar in a pagan ceremony. And a woman representing the high priestess takes the torch, gives it to the first torchbearer. When you see that torch, it came from the pagan temple, from one being a pagan priestess. These are pagan ceremonies linked to pagan gods. They'll say, well, it's all innocent. Doesn't mean anything, then why do it? And what happened in Paris was not innocent. It was actually a manifestation of what is actually happening in our culture. It's not just some little ritual mythology. It's actually happening now. There's something deeper. Let's go deeper. I wrote the book, The Return of the Gods. At the foundation of that is that parable we opened up with. Messiah gave of the man who had been delivered of the Spirit, but remains empty of God. He says, so the spirits come back in, fill him and repossess him worse than before. He says, so it shall be with this generation. Applies to individuals, but applies to generations, cultures. Western civilization was once overwhelmingly pagan, possessed. The Bible says behind the gods are spirits. They were possessed by the spirits. You look at pagan worship, these are people possessed. Then the gospel came and set them free. By the power of Messiah, the gods were driven out. The spirits were exorcised. But the warning is, if that culture, and that includes America, we're from that culture. If that culture, that civilization ever empties itself of God, like that man, is empty, if it ever turns away from God, the gospel, the word of God, Messiah that saved it, then the spirits that were cast out of it in ancient times, ancient pagan spirits, will come back into it to repossess it. To turn it from a Christian-based civilization to a pagan civilization. The spirits will come back, the return of the gods. That's exactly what we have been witnessing in our culture. And that's exactly what was manifested in living color at the Olympics. That was not an accident. Now a little secret here. The deliverance of Western civilization from paganism, the deliverance of these spirits and gods actually involved the Olympics. As the gospel made its way through the ancient Roman world, it cast out the gods. There was one institution that also had to be cast out, the Olympics. The Roman Emperor Theodosius reigned in the latter part of the 4th century AD. He was Christian. He played a part in the conversion of the empire and the decline of pagan worship. The Olympics, with its worship to Zeus and the gods, its sacrifices, its immorality, even the death of some of its athletes, was too pagan. So in the early 390s, Theodosius brought the Olympics to an end. In other words, listen, the ending of the Olympics was a sign of the Christianization, the gospel prevailing. You understand? The disappearance of the Olympics was part of the prevailing of the gospel. And so Western civilization was a Judeo-Christian based civilization. The Olympics were gone for about 1,500 years. But if a civilization begins turning away from God, what was cast out of it will return into it. And so on the verge of the 20th century, the century when Europe, because it began in Europe, the Olympics, Europe was beginning its departure from God. It was beginning to bring out what the 20th century was going to bring. The pagan Olympics were resurrected. Now, at the time of the resurrection, it was thought to be, the man who resurrected was a Frenchman who believed it actually would strengthen Christian morals. It was resurrected in 1896, on the eve of the 20th century. the 20th century that would see the massive turning away from God. The same decade when Lenin joined the Communist Party, which led to the Soviet Union. The same decade that developments in Germany would lead to Nazism and the Third Reich in the 20th century. So if the ending of the Olympics was a sign of the prevailing of the Christian faith in Western civilization, what does the return of the Olympics signify? The beginning of the return of paganism. The return of the gods, the turning away from God, which we are watching accelerate every day. One of the most critical Olympics, you know when it happened? 1936. It was held by Hitler in Nazi Germany in Berlin. The Third Reich was a culture that had done just that, turned away from the gospel and basically became pagan. And the Nazis held games in 1936. It was actually crucial in transforming the Olympics. The mass spectacle of the Olympics really began with Hitler. It was that Olympics also that revived the torch relay from Greece. That Olympics that restored the pagan torch lighting. There you see it right there with all the swastikas. So what would you expect to happen if Europe, if the West, America, are increasingly turning away from God, away from the Christian faith that delivered it? We would expect the return of paganism to repossess the culture, and we're watching pagan morals replacing Christian morals, pagan worldview. And we would expect the Olympics to start turning increasingly pagan, take off the mask. That's exactly what you saw. I can't here go into the detail of what is revealed in the return of the gods, but the ancient spirits are specific spirits, gods, demonic spirits, that are right now transforming our culture. I will tell you just this. The molten bull that you saw at the Olympics is a sign also of the ancient god Baal. That's one of the gods I speak about. Also became the sign of Zeus, for which the Olympics were held. The display of men dressed as women, well, that's modern. No, it's not. That was part of ancient paganism. Men would dress up as women, wearing their makeup, displaying themselves. That was paganism that was cast out with the gods. In the return of the gods, I speak of the goddess Ishtar, also known as Ashtoreth in the Bible, also known as Aphrodite in Greek, also becoming Venus in Rome. She was the goddess of sexuality. And so it's no accident we've had this sexual revolution as we turned away from God. It goes. But also she was the goddess who altered sexuality, morphed it, bent it, twisted gender. In her ancient inscription, she says, I am a woman, I am a man. It says she has the power to turn men into women and women into men. You want to understand what's happening right now? She even had men surgically transitioned. That spirit is back. It is using the realm of sexuality to turn a Judeo-Christian culture into a pagan one. What we saw at the Olympics was all part of it. It's not an accident that the desecration of the Last Supper involved the desecration of gender. It's all part of paganism. Men dressed about women is part of paganism. The priests of Ishtar were exactly that. They were men who dressed up as women in her temple.
I don't care what it takes, nothing will come in my way. The universe can throw all it wants at me, stick to my path, I'll stay. Broken away from you, I don't care. I will stare into the sun, slingshot me around where I can find you. I'll be a record breaker. Space itself is no limit for me. I will be your survivor. Just hold on, please wait for me. I will be a record breaker. Space itself is no limit for me. I will be your survivor. Just hold on, please wait for me. With the cosmos in my way, I don't care what they say. Supernovae and black holes, get out of my way. At the speed of light, I'm searching for you. In the moments to come, I'll break the boundaries for you. For you. I don't care what it takes, nothing will come in my way. The universe can throw all it wants at me, stick to my path, I'll stay. Broken away from you, I don't care. I will stare into the sun, slingshot me around where I can find you. I'll be a record breaker. Space itself is no limit for me. I'll be your survivor. Just hold on, please wait for me. Cosmos in my way, I don't care what they say. Supernovae and black holes, get out of my way. At the speed of light, I am searching for you. In the moments to come, I'll break the boundaries for you. For you, I will be your record breaker. Space itself is no limit for me. I will be your survivor. Just hold on, please wait for me. I will be your record breaker. Space itself is no limit for me. I will be your survivor. Just hold on, please wait for me. With the cosmos in my way, I don't care what they say. Supernovae and black holes, get out of my way. At the speed of light, I'm searching for you. In the moments to come, I'll break the boundaries for you. For you. Record breaker. Space itself is no limit for me. I'll be your survivor.
They would dance. People would bring people to see them dance. Children, undoubtedly. They weren't libraries, they were temples. They were her priests. The priests of Ishtar have returned. They don't know what they're doing, but this is the spirit. It conforms people into the image. They have become the new priests of our culture. They actually represent our culture as the ancient priests did. In ancient times, they performed sacramental acts in the temple. That was rites and rituals. The Last Supper is a sacramental act of the Christian faith. So now those who are walking in the shoes of the ancient priests who performed sacramental acts are now taking over the Last Supper, the sacramental central act of Christianity, to desecrate it and paganize it. It's an ominous sign that one of the two candidates for the American presidency launched her campaign actually on a television show devoted to glorifying drag queens. These are spirits that are transforming our culture. At the Olympics, they let their hair down. And as the culture turns more and more away from God, they start coming out of the closet. They start becoming brazen. But that wasn't all. Something then appears. At the Last Supper, the Lord took out the elements. It was Passover. Bread and wine, the sacred elements. So, in the desecration of the Last Supper, the meal appears on the table, and this is what it was. The meal was a man, basically virtually naked, covered in blue paint, covered in some leaves. So instead of in the place of communion, the body of Messiah, you have the body of a pagan god. Dionysus. By the way, he was also connected to the bull. But he appears now as if he is the sacred meal that are supposed to be representing the Lord's body. And if you don't believe it was food, look, that's what they did. He is the meal. This is the return of the gods, as if we are partaking now in a different god, a sign of a civilization that has exchanged its gods. The exchanging of the wine of the Lord's Supper to the wine of Dionysus, the god of wine and debauchery. So the Olympics actually celebrated before the entire world the ancient pagan god. The god of debauchery, the god of orgies, as he appears on the Last Supper. It wasn't enough to desecrate the Last Supper. They had to bring in a pagan god of immorality to finish the desecration. And with his appearance, the people at the Last Supper mockery, begin rubbing against each other as if they were in an orgy. That's exactly what, with the presence of the God. And they had a child in the midst of this at the scene who is there all doing this around the child. That shows you also what is actually happening in the culture. It's the spirits that want the children. And what was their explanation for putting a pagan god, Dionysus? They said, I believe it was the Olympic Committee, said, well, it's to make people, quote, aware of the absurdity of violence between human beings. So Dionysus becomes a mascot for peace and the ending of violence. Do you know what this god was? I mentioned him twice in the Return of the Gods. This is the god who would possess his followers, drive them into frenzies, drive them into madness, like the demonic spirit that Jesus speaks about. That's exactly, when this appears in the Last Supper mockery, they're like getting possessed. That's what that is. And in the frenzies of madness, his ancient followers would commit acts of violence. They would tear apart with their own hands fawns. His followers were largely women. As Dionysus would possess them, they would go into a frenzy, where it was said they could tear apart a man. In a famous Greek tragedy called the Bacchae, named after this god, in Rome he was called Bacchus, the ancient king Pentheus is brought into one of the celebrations, and the women followers of Dionysus, possessed by the god, tear him apart. One of them is his mother. That's the god they were celebrating at the Olympics. This is what they were celebrating. In the name of coming against violence, they celebrated this god, paganism. And as the possessed women of Dionysus were striking out at the, quote, patriarchy, the entire Olympics blasphemy was men dressed up as women striking out at the authority of Jesus, of God. See, when you descend into paganism, you lose rationality. That's why when you look at what's happening in the culture, you say, how could they do that? How could they do this? It's not rational. The followers of Dionysus lost their senses. They went mad. So the same Olympics also featured men, you notice, beating up women in the boxing ring. Did you see that? Beating them up. You see, now, apparently, men beating up women is now an Olympic sport. That's not rational. But they're not rational. The spirits seek the destruction of men, of women, of children, of marriage, of family, of civilization, of life. In the place of Messiah is the body of a pagan god. The exchange of Jesus for Dionysus. You know who was an apostle of Dionysus? This guy. Now, who is he? This is the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. He channeled the god Dionysus. He even started, at the end of his life, he called himself Dionysus. He signed his letters Dionysus. And he was driven entirely mad. He's the one who wrote the words, God is dead. He's the one whose writings were read by Adolf Hitler and helped lead Germany into the darkness of Nazism, a follower possessed of Dionysus. What happened in Paris was a sign of something much deeper that is happening in our culture. Our culture is exchanging God for something dark. When you turn away from God, you turn to another. There's no neutrality. The house will not stay empty. Something else will come in. What better place to manifest this than the ancient platforms that the gods had, the Olympics? And as this transformation advances, it's no longer a game. Oh, it's harmless. They thought it was harmless when they brought it back in. To resurrect the Olympics, you weren't just resurrecting folklore. What you saw in Paris wasn't a game. It's actually what is actually happening in our culture, and it was linked to paganism. Everything. From the alteration of sexuality, the alteration of gender, the mockery of God, the desecration of God, the involvement of children. What happened there wasn't a fluke. It was exactly what is happening. You see, in the first centuries, the gospel, when it entered the pagan world, it drove out those spirits. It ended the rites and sacrifices to the gods and the perversities and the unholy sacraments. In the Return of the Gods, I speak of the vengeance of the gods. When they come back with a vengeance. So now they're seeking to do to God, to Jesus, to God's people, what was done to them. You ended our sacraments, we're going to desecrate your sacraments. It almost doesn't matter what the motives were of the people, because behind them were spirits. When the gospel came into the pagan world, you know what the pagan world, which is led by the spirits, attacked especially? The communion, the Lord's Supper. They actually attacked the Lord's Supper. They accused Christians of cannibalism. So now when the same spirits return, they are all drawn to the same thing, the Last Supper, the communion, to make it pagan. You know, you took away Dionysus from us. We're going to take away Jesus and replace him with Dionysus. The first believers were aware of the priests and the worshipers of the god, and the men dressed up in women, the priests of Ishtar and Aphrodite and Sibyl. In Rome, those men dressed up as women were called the Galli. Male priests dressed in women's clothes with heavy, heavy women's makeup. Some even transitioned and mutilated. This is an actual depiction, ancient depiction of them. This is one of them. Well, now, this is what we have. Same thing. But you know when it all ended? All right, started video. At the same time, when the Olympics were ended, the Emperor Theodosius banned the Olympics as pagan. Same time, he banned the cult of male priest prostitutes dressed up as women. So the Olympics and the men dressed as women went out at the same time, and paganism same time. They disappeared together. So get this, now they're back together. That's not an accident that they were at the Olympics, and not an accident that it was pagan, and not an accident that it was a desecration of gods. It's representing the transition. Men are representing the culture that's being transitioned from Christian to pagan. In the beginning of the age, the West turned from the gods to God. Well, now it's turning from God to the gods. It doesn't have to mention the God. It doesn't matter if it knows it. It's turning to it. It's following it. In the beginning, it turned away from Dionysus to Jesus. Now you watched Jesus being replaced by Dionysus. In the beginning, they turned away from the wine of Dionysus's debauchery to the wine of the Last Supper. Now turning from the wine of the Last Supper to the wine of the god Dionysus. That's what you saw in Paris. And what it also reveals is behind the agenda of altering sexuality, it's not just about that. It's actually a war against God. It's what it showed you. That whole agenda was right there, linked to paganism, because it is. It was linked. It's a weapon. Sexuality has become a weapon. It's not about sexuality. It's against God and his people. You see, it was never about tolerance. That was only for a moment. It was about the exchange of gods. You know, when the gods first come in, that's what I wrote about, they come in the name of openness, tolerance. That's just to get in the doors of a Christian culture. Once they get in, tolerance starts fading, and it's every knee shall bow to the gods, every tongue will confess, you will celebrate with us, or we will cancel you. And so they will attack the faith that cast them out. They will attack the believers who cast them out. See, when a civilization calls evil what is evil good, hey, this is good now, you know it's going to call what is good evil. So it's going to show tolerance to evil. It's going to show no tolerance for good. Every step of our culture to embrace this new old morality, pagan, will be matched by another with a war of oppression against and persecution against God's people. So you have the signs of coming persecution. No accident happened in Europe. Same place that is now arresting people for preaching the gospel on the streets. Trying to put people in jail for simply speaking the scripture. What you saw on your television sets or your computer screens was not an accident. It's what the Bible says will happen in the last days. What does it say? In the last days there will be seducing spirits. In the last days immorality will increase. In the last days, the love of many will grow cold. In the last days, men will be without natural affection, lovers of self. They will persecute the people of God. So it also speaks of a day when in the holy place of God, the enemy will desecrate it, the abomination, before the world. Well, we now have a shadow of that. First time, such a desecration happening before the eyes of the entire world. So what do? We live in an age of desecration. Therefore, we must all the more strongly become a people of consecration. The opposite of desecration, consecration. That means we have to all the more strongly, you, me, consecrate our lives all the more to Him. Consecrate your eyes to see what is holy and not what is demonic. Consecrate your mouth to speak what is holy and not. Consecrate your hands to do God's will and not sin. Consecrate your feet to turn away from the ways of this ungodly culture and to the ways of God, regardless. And consecrate Him in everything you do. Your Redeemer who is holy, your Redeemer who gave His life for you. In the days of the gods, and this was not new to Paul or the apostles. They knew everything. We're seeing it for the first time. They saw it. They saw the drag. They saw all these things happen. In that day, Paul wrote, we war not against flesh and blood, but against powers, rulers, principalities. Our weapons are not earthly. They're powerful for the pulling down of strongholds. The Apostle Paul lived in a day with all that and persecution. With all that overwhelming the culture. There was a little movement. Yet he never once lived as someone who was defeated. Never lived as someone who's on the defensive. Never lived as if he was on the losing side. He lived as one who had the power to overcome and who could write the words to you, I can do all things through Messiah who strengthens me. He could write to you in the midst of all that. He can write to you and persecution. He could write to you, greater is He in you than he who is in the world. We are not of the gods. We are of the one true living almighty God. Therefore, you are on the winning side. Don't you forget it. We overcome the dragon by the blood of the Lamb, the word of our testimony, and loving not our lives to death. Against the darkness we shine the light of God, the word of the gospel, the power of salvation. We need to be spreading that word, especially now. When the world is saying shut up, you go even louder. And you who have never spread the word, you got to start spreading the word now. Wherever you are, it doesn't matter. You don't have to be called an evangelist. You just spread the word. That's the light. That's the answer. That's the antidote. More powerful than the dark and more powerful than the gods. And then finally, as Paul said in the language of the Olympics, everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a temporary crown that passes away. But we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, run in such a way that you'll win the prize. See, your race does not go to the one who runs the fastest, unlike the Olympics. Your race goes to the one who just keeps going. Just keep going and you win. This race, unlike the Olympics, does not go to the one who runs perfectly and gets the judges to put 10 or 9.999. No, this race goes to the one who gets up after they fall, gets up after they mess up, gets up again and again and again until they cross the finish line. And in other words, as serious and disciplined as those are who compete in these games, can you imagine? They spend hours every day for years for that one shot. They can mess it up in a second to get what? Imagine if we were like that with the things of God. Imagine, in other words, if we would become as serious and disciplined as those who compete for that, even more excellent, even more determined, more disciplined for the things of God, all the more excellent for the things of the Spirit, all the more dedicated to the things of God, excellent, determined, more than the Olympics, to rise in God, to rise in righteousness, in the Spirit, in love, in the Word, in power, in victory, in joy, and to win your battle, to win the spiritual victory and obtain your spiritual prize. Run your good race, fight your good fight, finish your good course, because there is no God like your God. There is no king like our King. There is no Savior like our Savior. The gods will fall, but our God is on the throne, and He has no intention of getting off of that. Keep your eyes on the prize. Go for the highest. Win your victory. Obtain the crown, and your God will call you my champion.
Okay, this is Jonathan Cahn back in the storm. Listen, I hope this gave revelation and to enable you to know what's happening, what's coming, and how to be strong. To get this to whoever in your life needs to hear it, just send the link to them. To make sure you don't miss any of the prophetic updates, prophetic messages on this channel, just hit subscribe. And the Dragon's Prophecy coming out in like 15 days from this video. You can get it, how to get anywhere online right now, and it'll be everywhere, okay? And lastly, to get the free gifts, the prophetic updates, to see all my teachings, to be part of the Great Commission, just go to hopeoftheworld.org. The link is there, the description, hopeoftheworld.org. And lastly, also to get the